Thank you so much, Ellen. I'm so excited to speak with you about your new film, Lee, starring Kate Winslet and Andy Samberg. I'm really excited to dive into some of the really intricate parts of your filmmaking approach, as well as your thoughts on the message that felt like it was an underlying message for women during the wartime. But first, before I even begin, I want to congratulate you, right? Not on just this beautiful film, but also just for being a pioneer and breaking these barriers in your life and in your career, right? I'm really excited to hear that your efforts are going to be celebrated as a cinematographer by receiving a Pioneer Award.
This is for the Kosciuszko Foundation Pioneer Award for a Polish American. Okay,
So
cool.
I've seen this movie, right? And I have to say that Kate Winslet is phenomenal as Lee Miller. And it's amazing to see how you two bring to life this incredible, complex story spanning war, photography, art, and personal trauma. What were the days like when you were putting this film together and finding the balance in portraying the artistic side while also creating this incredible narrative?
Well, Kate started this project before I came onto it. She had always been, she bought a table that belonged to a member of Lee Miller's family. But she and I had known about Lee Miller. We had talked about Lee Miller earlier when we were doing Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And she called me up and she said, I just bought this table and it belonged to Lee Miller's sister-in-law. And so she's the one who actually asked the question about why there had never been a film made about Lee Miller. And in fact, there had been many attempts to make a film about Lee Miller because she is an icon. She was someone who was a role model for a lot of women at the time, but also for for women today, who knew her story. And the thing was is that we knew that we wanted to get her story out. We wanted to tell the story not only of Lee and her trajectory through becoming a model, from going from a model. She learned photography from Man Ray. She decided that she wanted to go behind the camera. So she went to Man Ray and said, teach me photography. To someone who in middle age decided that she had to do her part and went to war in World War II to document what was going on. So we knew that the story was an important story to tell for women, but also because the story has many layers to it. The film has many layers, which is about the time, actually it mirrors the time that we're in right now, where the world was on the cusp of political upheaval. The film starts in the late 30s, right before Hitler invades Europe. And so we see and we experience in the film, how people had heard about him, but they didn't really take him seriously as someone who could wreak the kind of damage that he did, across Europe, as we know, became World War II. So the film also talks about, Lee as a woman and the fact that she, was someone who grew up in a very conventional time, someone who refused to take convention as her rules. She decided to make her own rules and said, why should I be barred from doing something just because I'm a woman? And, all of those questions become really relevant for us today. And so we both felt like we wanted to get this story out there. And so in 2018, Kate gave me a script and she said, I know you've been directing a lot of high-end episodic television. I know that, you're really interested in directing narrative. Here's an opportunity to maybe do a feature narrative. And, and so I, of course, was thrilled. I'd been working at the time on a script about Emily Dickinson and how to do, how to wrestle with the idea of doing a biopic. And I said to her, we don't want to make this a biopic. We want to make it bigger than that. We want to make it be a story that has universal themes in it. So she and I worked on developing the script that she had. And we brought in a writer, Liz Hanna, and we started going into prep after the pandemic, because during the pandemic, obviously, things couldn't move forward. So we were continually working on the script until I started doing soft prep in 2021. So, it was the film was a very long process to get finished. And It was a struggle to get it financed. Kate herself, went out and was trying to raise money for it, and, people were saying to her, "Well, why should we make a film about this woman? What makes her special?" So, there was, how to get it financed and how to make a story about this woman who was a true hero, but who was of her time and who was of our time.
So I often hear like financing of films is a challenge. How did you and Kate decide what scenes or what to produce or what to share to the financiers in your pitch deck? Like, what did you decide this needs to be shown? This needs to be like, how did that process come together?
Well, the first thing that one does is, besides having a script, which is the key starting point of any movie, I put together a director's deck, which was 90 pages long, which was, words. And Kate also contributed to that, in terms of, describing Lee Miller, who she was, what we wanted to do. And then I put in my director's um, uh, idea and proposal about how I thought that the film should be shaped and how it should look and how it should feel. And so that takes a lot of work to put that together. And then the finance people at CAA, particularly Sarah Schweitzman, who, just an amazing producer who deals with financing, went out with a sizzle reel. We put together a sizzle reel, the director's deck, and the script, and then proceeded to sell the film as an independent film. So, it's not easy to put together an independent film. It's not like you have a studio who just sits there and says, "Okay, we're gonna give you $20 million." It was something that was pieced together from country to country to get, the sales made of the film before we were able to make it.
That's not something I often hear from directors. It sounds like you really had to get down, metaphorically in the trenches, boots on the ground to really push this, to will this to be made. It
Well, any film that gets done, I think is a miracle, really, help people get films done, really, because it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of people, but this film in particular, there were a lot of us and a lot of women who came together who believed passionately in the story and in getting the story out there, who came together. So, literally, one talks about it takes a village, it takes a village.
Well, looking from the outside looking in, I have my own preconceived ideas, but I want to hear from you. Do you think that you and Lee Miller have any similar traits that maybe resonated with you in bringing this film to life?
Of course. I mean, Lee Miller, she was a photographer. I actually started in photography. Um, I actually didn't start as a photographer. I happened to take a photography class at the Rhode Island School of Design and decided that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a library as a historian, even though I'm really interested in history and people and decided I wanted to make films. I wanted to be a filmmaker. And um, so I really could identify with her about someone who wanted to use the medium to say something meaningful. And that intention that she went out to document and to find with what was happening to people during the war, that I could really identify with as someone who had done documentaries in the very beginning of my career, but also I was very interested in her early work as a surrealist. Lee Miller, and that's how I first knew her, was Lee Miller as someone who was part of a surrealist group, with Picasso, the poet Paul Eluard, Leonora Carrington, who was a painter in the surrealist tradition, um, um, many other people who were part of their core group, who we feature in the film. And so, her early work was experimental, and she was very much interested in metaphor. So some of her early work when she went out to go and photograph, after the Blitz started, I found very intriguing, a smashed typewriter on the pile of rubble. And what does that mean about, about writing and free press? So all of her work had meaning. And that I found very, very compelling and very interesting.
Well, thank you so much for including those moments of, the artists and the group that they had together. For all of us who studied art history, this was really meaningful. It was like, finally, I have my moment where I could recognize that in the film. So thank you for that. Um, I noticed you mentioned it. I'm hearing it in the way that the film came together, but I want to just double down a little bit. There's that underlying bond between the female characters in this film, even in the midst of the chaos, right? There's just that look that I've noticed the women were giving to each other. I want to just ask from your perspective, was that intentional? And if so, what was the goal in highlighting this connection between women?
Well, I think absolutely those looks are intentional because we want to show that the people helped each other. These women helped each other. Her editor of Vogue, British Vogue at the time, Audrey Withers, and she were very much a team. And as you can see in the film, those two together did something which was highly unconventional. What they did is they decided that they would tell war stories, or they would publish war stories in a fashion magazine so that the women who were reading these magazines would know what was going on in the war. And also, Lee Miller was someone who looked around the fringes of the frame. So instead of just looking at all the combat scenes of men in combat, she was looking around to see what was happening on the side, what was happening to the women, what was happening to the people who were affected by the war. So, she had a really unique point of view and showed us images that we would never have seen during the war if she hadn't gone to photograph them. And so she and Audrey had a very special, close relationship. As Lee, who is someone who felt very strongly about justice for women and seeing women, you know, brought that to the fore of, to show us, what was happening to women because otherwise we would never know. And when you think about, women's history is not well known in the past because if you don't write it or you don't see it and you don't publish it, then it doesn't exist. So it's kind of, I think about that with, people of color and people who have made significant strides in history, but they're unknown and they're unseen because nobody writes about it. So I think about the early astronomers who of North Africa, and nobody ever knew of what they had done because the work hadn't been published. Yet they were the precursors to many of the Western ideas that happened. So the same here, where you think about, Lee Miller was, in a sense, writing a women's history in so many words, as well as the history of what was happening during the war.
How did you choose which images to recreate or reference? Because there were so many, but how did you choose which ones you wanted to reflect in the film, and what impact did you hope that they would have?
Well, one of the aspects of the script is that it did have the original script had suggestions about certain scenes. Part of that was very influenced by one of the writers, Marion Hume, who had done extensive research on Lee's life and also what Lee had seen and experienced, as well as Anthony Penrose, Lee Miller's actual son who discovered her work in an attic after she passed away. And Anthony was very key in allowing Kate and I access to the archives, as well as to Marion Hume. Access, free access to look at any and all of her photographs, her writings, her personal effects that she would bring back. So we had a really interesting inside glimpse into her life and also to which photographs we felt would be, interesting and bring the audience to those moments. So part of the film is about recreating the moments in which she took those photographs and being able to experience the moments through her photographs. So, for example, when she and Davy Sherman go to Dachau, Davy Sherman is being played by Andy Samberg, and they go to Dachau and they go into a room where a lot of the crematorium, where the bodies are stacked. It was really important, and I felt it was really important that when we actually see what they are seeing, it's Lee Miller's photograph, actual photograph. We see it in the hands of the journalist. So we're experiencing that scene, the what they saw through Lee Miller herself and what she intended.
Were there any reactions from the cast or crew during those moments, like when you're seeing the bodies that maybe stood out or memorable after you guys were filming?
Very much so. And one thing that Kate said to me while we were filming is, I really don't, it would be great if Andy Samberg, doesn't do a rehearsal if we just want to come and do it, because so we can get that raw experience. So I said, absolutely, and that's a great idea. Let's do that, so we can actually get the emotion that he was going through on camera. And that was one of the things I really was determined to do about Dachau. I knew that I didn't want to do a literal interpretation of the camp, of trying to show this big wide shot and literally with the production design showing everything, because it was more, I thought, profound and moving to experience Dachau through their experiences. So the point of view of the film is really important.
Andy's, his performance as Davy, he gives a lot of emotional depth to the role. Did he have any interesting reactions or feedback to give about what he was seeing?
Andy was an exceptional actor. He normally, as a lot of people know him as someone who operates and works in the comedic world. But Andy, who came up as a suggestion from Marion Hume, who was, again, this writer, had said, this is a really out of the box idea, but what about Andy Samberg as David E. Sherman? And, Kate and I were like, wow, that's a fantastic idea. And so Andy, being someone who's very much a team player, agreed for us to talk to him and wanted to do an audition. He wanted to show us that he could do it. So, Andy, he embodies a great part of the emotional story within that part of the script. And people who see the film, you'll see that, you know, and really feel his range of emotions and really can identify with him. He was able to handle that role as Lee Miller's sidekick in a way with finesse and charisma and a very deep emotional resonance.
Well, I want to kind of circle back to Kate, just touching on some of these emotional beats, these emotional moments, because
Yeah.
Lee Miller, she you showed us the good, the bad, and the ugly of Lee in this film. And we even got to see her, I want to say, adopt her coping mechanisms, her smoking, her drinking, her eventual drug use. What were conversations like with Kate in trying to bring this character descent to life, but still allowing the audience to maintain empathy for her?
Well, Kate, she's brilliant. This is a brilliant performance by Kate. There's so much range, so much nuance all the way through the performance because, as you're saying, we see so many different aspects and sides of Lee. And also, the fact that we do see Lee in her 70s. So Kate also had to take that on to do, old age makeup, which was really well done. And she inhabited that character full force, in it fully, you know. At, well, let me just start that again. And Kate was playing Lee Miller also as in her 70s, as she's being interviewed by the journalist. And so there she is. She becomes Lee Miller as an older woman in prosthetic makeup, but also you could see in her body language, in every little way that she gets up from the chair, that she's become Lee Miller. I mean, it's an astounding, multi-layered, brilliant performance.
I really love that performance of the older age Lee Miller, and just the twist ending at the end, right? I don't want to necessarily ruin it for anyone, but it brings the story full circle. How did you conceptualize that framing device, and what message did you hope it would leave with audiences?
Well, we knew that, we didn't wanna make it a typical biopic, It's like, how do you tell the story about a person who actually lived and about what she's done without it being a biopic, And people tend to categorize and say, "Oh, okay," this is only the event of her life. So we knew that if we just told the event of this happened, and then that happened, it doesn't have the full circle of a story within a movie. And that's a key kind of difference of a lot of film. It's that within a film, you have a full story that starts from A to B. And so we gave this challenge to Liz Hannah, who was another writer who came in to help us shape the structure of the film. And it was Liz who basically came up with this device, um, of coming full circle at the end. And when audiences watch the film, they'll know what we mean about, there was real resolution at the end. Um, and it makes us think and reflect back on the whole film. And that I find is the greatest moment. Suddenly everything that you were thinking along the way suddenly gets turned upside down.
I love that. I love everything about that. It honestly just made me want to rewatch the film from the beginning as soon as I saw that, just to rewatch it with that context. So that was brilliant. Um, what advice do you think you would give to someone who wants to be the next, I don't know, if they want to be the next Ellen Kuras, or they want to be the next Lee Miller, or they want to be the next Kate Winslet? I want to just try to gather your thoughts, your perspective for any little girls who might be watching this that might want to follow in the trailblazing steps that have come before them.
Well, for all of the years I've worked in film, as a filmmaker, basically, because, I originally started out as someone who wanted to make films and then happened to go into cinematography, wasn't expecting to go into cinematography, but I I picked up the camera because I wanted to shoot. I was shooting my own thesis film and I was looking for how to make it meaningful, how to make the camera moves meaningful, how to make the story meaningful. So with having had the experience in cinematography and having had the experience of working on set and with different people, there's a few things I would say to people who are coming up. First of all, I never thought of all of the work that I've done as my career. I never thought, "Oh, I'm looking to develop my career." For me, mostly it was about the work I was doing, the kinds of projects I wanted to do. What did I wanna say? So, it's very selective about the kind of scripts that I would agree to work on because I knew that they had to be meaningful. And so that's a really important thing. You have to be passionate about what you're doing and what you're saying. And the other thing I would say that's very, very important is you have to learn to trust your own voice. Your inner voice is something that is telling you, um, you know, what you should do. I mean, people ask me for years, how did you know to do that? And I would say, just the voice on my shoulder, and that is a really important thing because that is your truth and to follow that. And Lee Miller followed her own truth. She listened to her own voice, and that is difficult at times to do that. As we see in the film, you know, she was asked to be silent for a long time, and it's not until we go through the film that we see her finally reveal her truth when she was searching to tell the truth of other people.
Well, thank you so much. That was beautiful. I really appreciate you giving me your time this afternoon. I know you're very busy, but thank you so much for speaking with me today. And I'm excited for fans who have not yet seen it to watch this film. It's such an important story that I think will still resonates, like you said, even today, right? The parallels between what Lee lived through is surprisingly relevant to what some women are living through now. So I'm excited for more folks to see this and to discover this incredible story.
Thank you, Anthony. And there is one thing I would say
Yes.
that True collaboration and inclusion offer the opportunity to have a better world.
Amen to that. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks a lot, Anthony. Take care.